No matter what religion you believe in, or if you're even religious at all, I think we can all agree to some extent that there have been some very, very special people in this world that have done amazing things and left a very long-lasting legacy. Well, the same goes for WORLDBOX too. With the new religions feature in the new update, many new things are possible. So today, we're going to be creating a prophet in WORLDBOX and trying to see if he can spread his religion across the entire world. So, let's get into it. Hey guys, I also made a Discord. Go join it, the link's in the description. So first, we just have a barren map, so we need to spread humans all across. And I'm just gonna hold down shift while spreading my mouse all around and give life to everything and everyone. Put them down here, and that should be good. Jeez, that's a lot of villages pop up immediately. Wow, that's a lot. And in world laws, we are going to turn off rebellions, but that's the only thing we're going to turn off, at least for now. Many villages have already begun to grow and expand, and soon enough they will actually begin fighting one another. But for now, I'm going to give them a little bit of time to develop. I'm going to give them 10 years before our god is chosen. So, I'll see you then. Alright, it is year 20 now, and these kingdoms have already expanded quite a bit. There's already 3,000 people in the world. But if we look in terms of religions, there is absolutely nothing. So, now it's time to begin creating our god. But our god, our prophet, has already been hiding among these men, and is located right up here in the enchanted forest. If we look into the enchanted biome, we can come down here and look at someone who's risen to the throne, and we'll find this king named Bibbidi Bob. Now, who the heck is Bibbidi Bob? If you look at his traits, he's quite powerful, and just 33 years old. What could he possibly achieve? Well, being the king of an entire nation on the Enchanted Isles, he holds an immense amount of power. And realizing his divine goal, he begins to create his own religion, with himself at the center, which might sound egotistical almost, but I assure you it's not, as he knows what he was born to do. The first religion was made, and the first religion named Babology had been created, already with 94 members. If we look here at the traits of the religion, immense power was caused by being a member of it. At the time of creation, only members of the clan could tap into the religious magic. His kingdom only held 30, but his influence was already seen far and wide across the world. Babology would spread like wildfire. But Bob was a realist. He knew what it would take to truly spread his religion across the world. So, without wasting much time, he renamed his kingdom. He renamed it to the Way of Bob. And his first act as king of the Way of Bob was to take over the Enchanted Isles, which he would use as a base for his religion. He declared war on the nearby kingdom of Petro, where Bob himself would play a large role in helping take down the kingdom, using some of his magic power and abilities. The Petroian army was really no match for Bob's army, and with the help of Bob, the kingdom would quickly fall, and only one more kingdom remained, the quite powerful kingdom of Failerveld. But Bob first had to regrow his military strength. During the war, Bob played an extensive role, having nearly 12 kills, showing his prowess on the battlefield and earning the respect of not only his citizens, but the followers of his religion too. At this point, Babology had already nearly doubled in size since its conception and was still growing. At this point, the Way of Bob had strengthened his army strong enough to possibly take on Failerveld. A good advantage for Bob was much of Failerveld was already a member of Babology, except for the king, who was not, meaning that once the war started, many of Failerveld's own people would likely turn against the king, meaning an early war. War was declared between the two, and as expected, almost the entire army immediately fled, leading down to just one soldier to defend against the oncoming Bob army. To prove his bravery, once again Bob himself would also charge in the battle. The kingdom did not take long to fall. On a much more negative note, Bob appeared to be in love with a 16-year-old woman named Rosario. Babology had finally encompassed the mainland. It was the official religion, and many were happy. But while the religion had taken some popularity on the eastern coast of the mainland, it still wasn't all that popular, and Bob had to find a way in. He knew at this point he could not take on the kingdom of Flavor. Despite having many Babologists in the kingdom, he would quickly fall under their army. But he saw an opening down here, the kingdom of Seri. Within it, there was a couple Babologists here and there, but his main concern was just getting on the mainland so he could use it as a hearth to help expand his religion. So that's immediately what he did. Without hesitation, he declared war on Seri and began collecting himself and many of his troops to go down there and win the war. Within hours, the kingdom had deployed their forces on the mainland of Seri, and it didn't take long for it to fall. the kingdom finally fell, and the way of Bob now had a foothold on the island. Bob was quite happy about his new expansion, but he knew that he would have to move in quick. Bob knew that the kingdom of Uflavor or Flatigrand could potentially cause massive issues for him. However, Uflavor was in an intense war with Flatigrand, meaning that now was really the perfect time for Bob to jump in. But right as Bob was about to get involved with Flatigrand, the threatening kingdom of Griffad intended to quickly take Flatigrand, working with Uflavor. But officially, Griffad never allied with Uflavor, meaning that there was a very good chance that in their weakened state, Bob could go invade, and that's exactly what he did. With an extremely weakened army, Bob and his troops quickly moved into Uflavor to take over the kingdom. The city did not take long to fall, and soon the way of Bob had grown even bigger. Babology had quickly spread over the entire northern hemisphere of the whole world, and because of this, King Bob began looking into the northern cities to expand into, starting with the city they were already at war at, named Uzdol. The empire was already not very powerful and wouldn't last very long fighting the way of Bob. But with the world population at 5,000, Babology still only had 271 members, which, doing the math, is around only 5% of the world. The way of Bob would begin strengthening their army and focusing on a nearby, very powerful kingdom of Ledburg. Bob's ultimate plan was to grow strong enough to match the population of Griffad and take them over, cementing the way of Bob as a cultural and religious powerhouse that could not be messed with. But around the rest of the world, many other kingdoms, including kingdoms like Ledburg, were already consolidating power by taking over many different villages. However, at this point, Bob officially declared war on Ledburg before they got too powerful. Multiple armies moved into the kingdom to try and quickly deal with the Ledburgian army. Once again, being the hero that he is, Bob himself even charged in the battle to help deal with the Ledburgs. At this point, despite only having 500 health and being supposedly on the surface looking very weak, Bob had over 70 kills because of the powers that he held within him. The first Ledburgian city and the capital would quickly fall, opening up the weaknesses within the empire as Bob's army continued to push in. Bob's powerful navy would help assist him in clearing the coastline of any soldiers along Ledburg, and very quickly, the kingdom would fall. Once Ledburg was captured, the way of Bob began setting its sights south on a fairly weak kingdom of Ryzu, located towards the middle of the world. Bob would end up declaring war on Ryzu and quickly took it too, strengthening his kingdom even more. And at this point, the religion of Babology began spreading extremely quick. Already over 600 members in just a few years since we last checked. And at this point, this was now well over 10% of the world's population. However, he still paled in comparison to the might of Griffad. In response, instead of looking south, Bob figured he had to take at least one or two more solidly powerful kingdoms before he could invade. And that's exactly what he would do, as he began looking west to the powerful kingdom of Babology. But Bob would have to wait for his army to strengthen up even more. Meanwhile, Babology continued to grow, but a new second religion began popping up, named Ewufagil. And it was only a few years old, but it had a couple of members, and this upset many Babologists who believed and knew that Babology was the only true way. The founder of the religion was an old man named Gertrude, who would become very popular and almost infamous for his creation of a new religion, but that meant it wasn't long until he was assassinated. By an unknown assailant, he would be killed when multiple bombs were dropped on top of him. Once Bob believed his army was strong enough, he finally declared war on Babology. The entire army charging in at once, they honestly wouldn't be a big match. Bob's navy took to the northern coastline, destroying and shooting at many of the armies, while the main army fought through the north, along with Bob to help take the kingdom. Babology fought hard, but eventually they were no match for the wrath of Bob and his huge army. Down south, a new alliance had been made named the Thunder Coalition, which consisted of many of the three powerful kingdoms down here, and together they had the goal of taking down Griffad once and for all. Griffad knew this plan was happening and decided to strike first, hoping that they could conquer all three of these kingdoms. And that war began. This war could either mean very good news or very bad news for Bob, as if Griffad does end up winning this war, they'll become almost unstoppable. Griffad's war, at least at first, appeared to be somewhat of a stalemate. However, Bob had quickly dealt with Babology with only one village left remaining. Bob was still upset at having a divided empire. While he had a large mainland here in the north and on the islands, his original foothold of Erhorst was separated from the rest of his empire. But realizing the weakened position that Griffad was in, he decided to take action and would declare war. So, once his army was back in position, Bob decided to declare war. Almost immediately, a huge battle took place at Erhorst, where Bob was involved himself. Technically, Griffad still had a larger army than the Way of Bob, but remember, some of these other kingdoms like VCAP and the entire alliance of the Thunder Coalition still had a decent amount of soldiers, meaning that if they were able to work together, they should be able to take down Griffad. The first village of Winnie fell, finally connecting the Way of Bob. This war in total had already led to the death of well over 1,000 soldiers. But despite their less in number, Bob was effective in its attacks because instead of splitting up his army like the Griffad army had did, he concentrated all of his forces on one city at a time, slowly picking away at their forces and being able to take the kingdom. Griffad was now in a very precarious spot here, while Bob and his army continued to push on in the south. Bob at this point already had over 100 kills and was approaching nearly 100 years old, which was no bother for him as he was immortal. And finally, after many years and many lives lost, Griffad was destroyed, and this land organization was the peace deal that was determined, which seemed very fair to most of the southern kingdoms. However, as we all know, Bob had bigger ambitions, realizing that he would have to take over the world. And seeing the weakened state that the Thunder Coalition was in after just coming off fighting a war, they were quick to act. As soon as Bob's troops had left the Thunder Coalition territory, he immediately declared war on it, knowing that if he could win this last war right here, he would have no problem in total world domination. And by this point, Babology had nearly 2,500 members, which, as you can see here, is nearly half the world population as a whole. Babologists were present throughout the entire world, and there was over 1,000 more Babologists than there was even people in the kingdom of Bob. Other kingdoms, like Warad, literally had Babology as their main religion. As a matter of fact, Warad became so tightly entangled with Babology that they signed an official alliance with the Way of Bob that would ultimately lead to their annexation into the Bob Kingdom. But with the kingdom of Warad now part of the Way of Bob, it's pretty clear that this war would be pretty lopsided. And finally, after a surprisingly long war, the Way of Bob would be victorious. And under their peace agreement, the kingdom of Warad would officially integrate into the Way of Bob without conflict. The Way of Bob had now become an expansive kingdom. It started with just a little island that had now grown into taking over half the world. But they didn't plan on stopping there. They knew the only way to spread the true word of Bob and the Prophet, he had to take over the entire world. But many of these countries down here did not want to be controlled by someone else, especially for a religion, as you can see here, that they did not officially endorse, despite having many members. So all of these kingdoms merged into a single alliance named the Fight Against Bob. And population-wise, they were somewhat similar to the Way of Bob, but militarily-wise, they had nearly 900 soldiers, while the Way of Bob had just 600. So knowing this, Bob couldn't quite yet act on them. But once again, at this point, nearly 75% of the world was Babologists, which means that just statistically, about half of the members of the Fight Against Bob were Babologists themselves, meaning that the army over here really didn't have anything to hold it against, and if war was declared against Bob, they wouldn't hold up at all. And as a matter of fact, this difference would be their quick undoing. All of the members of the Fight Against Bob, other than one, actually left the clan and formed their own alliance named the Independence Alliance, which meant instead of fighting against Bob, they were simply fighting for their freedom and their independence. However, the kingdom of Avalis, which is the furthest away from the original hearth of the Way of Bob, all the way in the Enchanted Isles, naturally did not support the religion that much, and they continued to support against it. The Independent Alliance and Avalis actually had so much conflict that they declared war on one another, and this would prove to be a detrimental mistake, at least in terms of their independence, as soon as this war broke out, Bob was quick to jump in and declare war on both of the kingdoms, meaning that, by all means, they didn't stand a chance. Fighting broke out all over and world populations began to plummet. However, as we know, Bob was no one to stray away from a fight, and he could typically be found in the middle of the action. However, in this case, Bob began taking some serious damage, and he was unsure if he would actually be able to recover this fight this time. And after many attacks, Bob was slain. Now, you might think that Bob being slain would be the downfall of the Way of Bob, but it would be quite the opposite. This invigorated a fire among many of members of the Way of Bob, who saw him as a martyr for the cause, the religion as a whole, and began to fight even harder. Mimicking Bob's old tactics, the armies strengthened together and quickly began taking out the Independence Alliance and the city of Avalis at the same time. It was unbelievable, as all of the members of the kingdom began falling almost simultaneously. Eventually, it got to a point where defeat was imminent and clear, with only a couple of villages being left over. With many slain, the last village of Svetro was finally destroyed, meaning that the Way of Bob had finally reigned supreme. Babology as their official religion would begin growing once again, with all of their new children being firm Babologists. And while Bibbidi Bob, the founder of Babology, was gone, his family remained. The current leader of the nation was one of Bob's grandsons, named Polfield, who began leading the new kingdom through its effort to try and universalize everyone into the single religion. And at a certain point, Babology had crossed 3,000 members, and with 4,200 people, it's clear that around 75% of the world had become true Babologists. It was clear that over time, Babology would take over the world. With its humble roots in the small city of Ifchamp, with just a couple dozen people, Bob was not able to only spread his religion, but his entire kingdom throughout the world, and spread the mighty word of Bob. I thought this video was pretty cool. Once again, if you guys like these kind of storyboard episodes, let me know. And if you have any video ideas in the comments, just let me know.